Hi, everybody. So here we are at week 2. Hope everybody's doing well in the course so far. And of course, as always, please let us know if you need anything or there's anything we can help with. Let's get into week 2. Here's what we're going to talk about this week. The term and the idea of memory keeping, as opposed to what we might think of as traditional archiving. We'll talk about that. The importance and practice of respectful community engagement, relationship building with community members, and then just a brief overview of this week's assignment. This week's reading and content all revolve around how to engage with the community aspect of community archives. And there are a couple of different angles for this or ways to think about it. If you're a community archivist embedded within your own community during the work, your perspective on engagement within the community comes along with your own belonging in that community. However, for most of us, it's more likely that future roles within archives will be in some kind of institution, in which case you'll be on the institutional side of engaging with a community whose memories and culture you're trying to help preserve. One of the most profound aspects of this community archives work is the recognition that communities are deeply engaged in meaningful memory work when they preserve their own culture. This is not simply about storing records or objects. It's about creating a quote unquote safe keeping place, which we're going to talk about a lot as we talk about the content management system Mukurtu. Mukurtu, as some of you may have heard if you've taken TLAM before, is a content management system that is specifically designed to support Indigenous communities in protecting and sharing their own cultural heritage. We're going to talk more about it in week 4. But the idea of this safe keeping place applies to many community memory keeping efforts, not just Indigenous communities. The safe keeping place idea means that community archives are more than just a repository. They're a sacred space where the community's identity, their values, and their traditions are safeguarded for future generations. And again, those of you who have taken TLAM will be familiar with some of these ideas. If you haven't taken TLAM, by the way, might I take this opportunity to highly recommend looking into taking it next semester. When we as archivists work with communities, it's essential that we move with great care. We must tread lightly, engage slowly, and act with sincerity and authenticity. Relationships are absolutely at the heart of this work. Without trust and mutual respect, nothing else we do, whether that's digitizing, describing, providing access, will have the intended impact. These relationships must be sincere and solid because they form the foundation upon which any community archive can truly thrive. Ultimately, community engagement is not just a box to check off. It is an ongoing, respectful partnership. And as archivists, we are not just facilitators. We are co-stewards of this very sacred space, working alongside communities to ensure that their stories, their memories, their identities are preserved on their terms. We're talking about this so much in week 2 because it's the foundation of everything else that happens in community archives. So, in order to understand the relationship-based concepts of community archives, we must first understand the ways in which we might call traditional or institutional archives, how those institutional archives practices have failed marginalized communities, whose stories have been excluded and annihilated, as we talked about last week. This week, one of your readings, the Burgess-Jules essay, outlines quite a bit of that failure of care. But a foundational concept that you may have heard of before, but is important to bring into this conversation, is that of vocational awe. So there's a librarian named Fobazi Attar, whose essay is also included in this week's readings. She explains that vocational awe, which is the idea that we as librarians or archivists are engaged in such meaningful work that our field is beyond reproach. That idea can actually lead us to willfully ignore the field's shortcomings and deny justifiable critiques of the work that we're doing. So it's important to understand the ways our field falls short before learning about more authentic, community centered ways to proceed. So that's why that reading is included in this week's assignment. Talking about those relationships, the authentic relationships are at the heart of an important concept that you're going to read this week called slow archives. And the idea of slow archives, again, applies in broader context than just Indigenous archives. That's the context of Kim Kristen's article, but it's a foundational concept for much more than just Indigenous archives. Slow archives is a perspective that reminds us that an urgency to get to an end product, like a processed collection, is a predominantly white Western construct. It's even built into funding timelines and project deadlines. This view of time and urgency does not allow for the kind of conversation, the storytelling, and the knowledge and wisdom that are passed on through hours of talking and sharing meals and walking together and bouts of silence that come with building relationships. Here's a couple of examples from our own community archives work. When working with tribal partners, it is very common to start meetings or gatherings later than the appointed time and to spend a significant amount of time talking and chit-chatting before getting down to any quote-unquote business. Similarly, moving quickly through an agenda and ending a meeting on time with a deliverable is just not the most sincere or authentic way to spend that time. It's much more real and richer to hear the stories and traditions that make this work so important. Similarly, those conversations lead to relationships that don't, or at least shouldn't, end with a finite project deadline. It has been all too common for academic institutions and researchers to drop into communities, extract their historical perspectives, and disappear again to take credit for the community's work by publishing these like well publicized research articles, all the while abandoning the relationship with the community that made the work possible in the first place. So, Slow Archives reminds us to instead see the maintenance of those relationships as a central responsibility, a responsibility that transcends and supersedes the collection's work. As another example from LGBTQ plus archives, it can sometimes take years to build trust with older members of the LGBTQ plus community who are understandably concerned about the care with which their stories will be told. Spending that time is a gift to both the community and the archivists assisting them, and is truly at the heart of the work, not the stuff that may or may not end up in the archive. So this week, as in all weeks, you have several readings, a set of discussion prompts, and a part of your community archives plan to turn in. This week in the project plan, please write 500 words about your community engagement plan. So in your community archive, with whom will you be communicating and building relationships? What modes of communication will you use to engage with the community? And how would you plan to sustain those relationships over time? And as always, keep in touch with us if we can help guide you or answer any questions. We will see you over in Canvas.